I suspected my billionaire husband was planning to divorce me for his mistress. So I moved $3 in assets. 2 weeks later, he filed, then panicked when his plan backfired. I've spent months reading stories like this, never imagining I'd have one of my own. But here I am, Letitia Winston, formerly Mrs. Kendrick Pedersen, with a tale that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. Before we continue with the story, be sure to subscribe to the channel and give the video a like. Oh, and drop a comment below letting us know where you're watching from. We love seeing that I need to be clear about something up front. I'm not paranoid. I'm not the jealous wife who checks her husband's phone or interrogates him about every late meeting. For 5 years, Kendrick and I were what people called goals. We had the penthouse overlooking the city, the charity galas, the magazine spreads. Friends would watch us at dinner parties and whisper about how lucky I was to have landed a billionaire who still looked at me like I hung the moon. And for a long time, I believed it too. We had our rhythm. He'd surprise me with weekend trips to Napa. I'd have his favorite bourbon waiting after brutal board meetings. We worked. That's why what happened next felt like the ground opening beneath my feet. The shift around 3 months ago, things changed. At first, it was barely noticeable, the kind of thing you'd dismiss if you weren't paying attention. Kendrick started password protecting his phone. This was a man who used to leave his device on the kitchen counter for hours, who'd hand it to me and say, "Answer that," when he was in the shower. Suddenly, every notification made him tense. When I made a joke about it, "What, are you running some secret empire I don't know about?" he laughed it off. "Just tightening security. You know how corporate espionage is." Fine, reasonable. Except it wasn't just the phone. He started taking calls in other rooms. He'd be sitting next to me on the couch, his phone would buzz, and he'd say, "Give me a second, babe," before disappearing into his office and closing the door. When he came back, I'd ask casually, "Everything okay?" And he'd give me nothing. Just Ramirez panicking about the merger. Then came the overnight trips. Kendrick always traveled for business. That wasn't new. But the Maldives? 3 times in 6 weeks? For investor meetings? The man who used to complain about 8-hour flights was suddenly a frequent flyer to a tropical paradise, and he'd return with a tan, but no photos, no stories, just exhaustion and distance. The pattern emerges. I started noticing smaller things. His laptop, which used to stay open on his desk, was now always closed and angled away from doorways. He changed his computer password. I knew because I went to order his birthday gift using our joint account portal and got locked out. When I mentioned it, he said IT made everyone update their credentials. Another reasonable explanation. But then there was the perfume. Not mine. A sweet, vanilla-heavy scent that clung to his suits. When I asked about it, he said it must be from one of the clients at the dinner meeting. Except Kendrick's clients were hedge fund managers and tech bros, not the type to drown themselves in department store fragrance. The real turning point came on a Thursday night. Kendrick told me he had a late meeting and would grab dinner downtown. Fine. I was working on organizing a charity auction anyway. Around 9, I went to his office to borrow his charger. Mine had finally died. His laptop was still there, open but locked. And sitting on top of it was a folder. A physical manila folder, which was strange because Kendrick was paperless to a fault. I shouldn't have looked. But when you're already questioning everything, your instincts override your morals. Inside was a document titled, "Notice of Intent to Divorce, Draft." My name was listed under Respondent. The filing date was circled, our anniversary, 2 weeks away. But it wasn't just the divorce that made my blood run cold. It was the second document underneath. A memo from his legal team outlining how to trigger the bad faith clause in our prenup. Apparently, if they could prove I'd engaged in material deception or financial misconduct, I'd forfeit my settlement rights entirely. They were planning to fabricate a case, plant evidence if necessary, and leave me with nothing. My hands trembled as I photographed every page. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Something inside me just froze over. The man I loved wasn't just leaving me. He was systematically planning my destruction. That night, when Kendrick came home smelling like vanilla perfume and lies, I smiled and asked how his meeting went. He kissed my forehead and said, "Exhausting, babe. I'm going to bed." I sat in the dark living room until 3 a.m., staring at those photos on my phone. By sunrise, I wasn't a betrayed wife anymore. I was a strategist with a 72-hour window and $3 million in liquid assets to move before Kendrick could lock me out forever. Kendrick's new password was the first thing that didn't fit. For 5 years, his devices had been an open book, more out of habit than trust. He'd toss me his phone from the shower so I could read his emails aloud, leave his laptop glowing on the marble kitchen island while he paced during conference calls, never once glancing over his shoulder. Now the screen went dark the moment he stepped away, and a new, sharp little chime sounded every time he locked it, as if it were mocking me. "It wants everyone on two-factor," he said when I asked, barely looking up from his espresso. "Security is a nightmare right now." Reasonable. That was the problem. Every explanation made sense alone. It was the accumulation that soured the air. He started coming home later, walking in with that brittle, overperformed exhaustion that felt like a costume. The suit stayed on longer. His tie remained perfectly knotted through dinner. When I asked how the board meeting went, he'd press a kiss to my cheek and say, "Same sharks, different blood in the water," before drifting to his office and closing the door. And then there was Elena. She arrived as a name in passing. The new assistant, mentioned between sips of bourbon. A week later, she was a shadow threaded through every corner of our lives. Her emails chimed at midnight. Her number flashed on his screen during Sunday brunch. At the gala, she hovered just behind Kendrick's shoulder, blonde hair pulled into a sleek twist, tablet in hand, always leaning in to murmur something only he could hear. I watched her refill his champagne without being asked, watched his mouth curve in that small, private smile I used to think belonged to me. When our eyes met across the ballroom, she didn't look away. She assessed, calculated. Then she gave me a polite, perfectly measured nod, as if acknowledging a predecessor. "Efficient," Kendrick said later, when I mentioned how omnipresent she seemed. "She anticipates." I lay awake that night, his back turned toward me, the soft glow from his phone lighting the room each time a message arrived. The scent of an unfamiliar floral perfume lingered on his shirt draped over the chair. Too sweet, cloying, nothing like mine. It was nothing, I told myself. But the scent stayed, night after night, long after the shirt was gone. Kendrick liked to say that systems were only as strong as their weakest link. He meant competitors, regulators, rogue board members. He never imagined the weakest link would be his wife. The night I broke into his world, the penthouse was silent except for the low hum of the city pressing against the glass. He'd flown out that afternoon on another investor trip, leaving behind a half-drunk coffee and his usual digital fortress. His office still held the faint trace of his cologne, dry and expensive, layered over that stubborn floral note that didn't belong to me. His laptop waited on the desk, lid closed, a sleek, black promise. I didn't start with the computer. I started with the routine. Kendrick was a creature of habit. Efficiency was his religion. Passwords changed every quarter, but followed the same skeleton. An event, a number, a symbol. I knew the pattern because I'd watched him build it, year after year, like a ritual. Our anniversary. The date he closed his first billion-dollar deal. His private jet's tail number. Small boasts disguised as security. When the screen blinked awake, his reflection appeared first, then mine, faintly beside it. I typed the first guess with shaking hands. Denied. Second guess. Denied. My pulse beat in my throat. The third try felt like loading a gun. On the fourth attempt, the desktop blossomed open. For a moment, all I saw were the familiar icons. Portfolio dashboards, board decks, charity folders named for foundations we'd founded together. Then my eye caught on a new directory, tucked between them with almost lazy care. Personal restructure. I clicked. Inside, the world narrowed to a list of subfolders, neatly dated. Legal, strategy, PR, one more, LW, marital. The documents opened one after another, each worse than the last. A draft petition for dissolution of marriage, my full name spelled out in cold legalese. A proposed filing date, our anniversary, highlighted in yellow. A timeline detailing when to shift assets, when to limit subjects' access to confidential accounts, when to introduce evidence of financial irresponsibility to trigger bad faith clause. Subject. That was me. There were emails with his attorneys discussing narrative framing and controlling public sympathy. A line item, almost casual, about preparing Elena for potential testimony as credible third-party witness. The room tilted. For a moment, I thought I might be sick right there on his pristine desk. Instead, I took out my phone. Every page, every email thread, every memo, I captured them all, frame by frame, until my camera roll looked like a case file. By the time I finished, my hands had stopped shaking. The horror was still there, but something sharper had slid into place beneath it. Kendrick believed he was executing a strategy. He had no idea I'd just found the blueprint. Kendrick said the board dinner would run late. He kissed my cheek in the foyer, already half turned toward the waiting town car, murmuring something about pension reform and activist shareholders. His suit was knife-sharp, his cufflinks understated and obscene, and that same cloying floral scent floated around him like a signature. I smiled, straightened his tie, and watched him disappear into the elevator, my face a mask I'd perfected over 5 years of being Mrs. Pedersen. The moment the doors closed, I changed. I'd already seen the legal plans. I knew the date he intended to discard me. What I didn't know yet was where the money was going. Our joint investment account had been bleeding steadily for weeks, large transfers vanishing under vague notations. Property restructuring, liquidity event, temporary allocation. Kendrick loved patterns. He also loved routine. His calendar, synced to the tablet he carelessly left in the kitchen, told me everything. Dinner wasn't at the steakhouse he'd claimed. It was at a private residence presentation in a new luxury high-rise downtown. I arrived 10 minutes after his car, sitting 2 blocks away with my engine off, watching the glittering facade through the windshield. The building was all glass and arrogance, the kind of place developers marketed with words like curated lifestyle. A black SUV pulled up, and Kendrick stepped out, phone to his ear. Elena slipped from the other side. She wasn't in assistant mode tonight. No tablet, no clipboard. Just a sleek black dress that clung like intention and a smile tuned solely for him. He offered his arm. She took it like she'd practiced. Together, they walked through the revolving doors. I followed on foot, staying just far enough behind to be invisible. The concierge barely glanced at me when I stepped into the lobby, too busy greeting Kendrick by name. "Penthouse showing," he said, signing the digital pad. "Funds wired from the Pedersen-Winston investment vehicle this afternoon." Our name. Our account. The elevator ride felt endless and instantaneous at once. At the top, an agent with a rehearsed grin ushered them into a glass-walled palace floating over the city. I lingered near the doorway, pretending to admire the view while listening. 3 bedrooms, the agent said. Private elevator, full concierge, turnkey. The seller accepted your offer. All that's left is finalizing title transfer from the joint entity. Kendrick glanced at Elena, that private smile again. "Happy early move-in," he murmured. "Consider this your fresh start." My vision sharpened to a point. The word joint echoed in my skull. He was using our money to buy his mistress a new life. I watched Elena glide across the marble floor, already inhabiting the space like it belonged to her, already erasing me. I could have walked in, could have shattered the scene with a single sentence. Instead, I memorized every detail: the agent's name, the unit number, the price murmured over champagne. By the time I left the building, the betrayal no longer felt abstract. It had an address. The office was in a building Kendrick would have driven past without seeing, all brick and bad lighting, tucked between a pawn shop and a nail salon. That was why it felt safe. No one from our world would come here voluntarily. Inside, the waiting room smelled like burnt coffee and old paper. A receptionist with chipped red polish took my name without recognition, which was its own kind of relief, and led me down a narrow hallway to a glass-walled conference room. 2 people were already there. The first was a woman in a charcoal suit, her hair scraped back into a severe knot, eyes cool and assessing. The second was a man in shirt sleeves, jacket folded over the chair, laptop open, a forest of spreadsheets glowing on the screen. Neither stood when I entered. They didn't need to impress me. I was the desperate one. "Letitia," the woman said, motioning to the chair opposite. "I'm Cassandra Rowe. You said you have documentation?" I slid my phone across the table, screen already lit with the photos from Kendrick's secret folder. Cassandra scrolled without expression, her eyes moving faster than seemed possible. The man, Nathan, the forensic accountant she'd recommended in her discreet email reply, leaned in, fingers already flying over his keyboard. "You understand," Cassandra said after a moment, "that what your husband is planning is not a simple divorce. This is a hostile exit strategy." I nodded, my hands locked together in my lap so they wouldn't betray the tremor running through me. "He's moving money," I said, "from our joint entity. I watched him put a down payment on a condo for his assistant last night." Nathan made a small sound, half snort, half calculation. "Pedersen-Winston investment vehicle," he murmured. "I've pulled the last 90 days of activity. He's consolidating liquidity, not hiding it. Yet." "Yet?" I echoed. Nathan turned the laptop so I could see. Lines of transactions, dates, amounts, notes. He tapped a cluster highlighted in red. "These are staging transfers. Once he's finished, he'll push everything into entities you don't have standing to touch. Shells, offshore instruments, trusts with you specifically excluded." Cassandra folded her hands. "Which means you have a window, a small one." "How small?" 72 hours, Nathan said before she could answer. "Maybe less if his lawyers get spooked." The number landed like a physical object between us. Cassandra's gaze sharpened, If you want to walk away with anything, we have to move now. No hesitation, no second thoughts. This will not be polite. I thought of our wedding vows, the penthouse, the gala photos framed along our hallway. Then I thought of Elena standing barefoot on marble that I had effectively paid for. Polite is over, I said. Nathan gave a brief, satisfied nod. Good. Then let's talk about how to relocate $3 million before your husband realizes you've stopped playing your part. The countdown started the moment Kendrick's car disappeared from the garage feed. Nathan had texted me the board meeting time at 8:02 a.m. Sharp, attached to a calendar screenshot he had no legal business possessing. He'll be locked in for at least 2 hours, the message read. No phones allowed in the room. This is your window. I stared at the screen until 8:14, fingers hovering over the trackpad, heart punching against my ribs. $3 million. Years of my life translated into numbers and routing codes. If I hesitated, it would all vanish into structures designed to erase me. At 8:15, I logged in. The joint investment portal greeted me with Kendrick's preferred minimalist interface. Everything clean lines and muted blues. Balances glowed at the top. An obscene row of zeros. I moved to the sub-account Nathan had flagged, the one Kendrick had been quietly fattening while he planned my execution. Remember, Nathan had said, leaning over the conference table, voice low. You're not stealing, you're reclaiming, and you can't move everything, just enough to hurt. 3 million. No more, no less. I initiated the first transfer, fingers steady now. From Pedersen Winston Investment Vehicle to the newly formed entity Nathan had created, Winston Strategic Trust. My name. No hyphen, no husband. The bank's security protocol threw up a challenge prompt, a small attempt at resistance. First vacation together? Santorini. I typed the word and hit confirm. 8 seconds of spinning wheel. Then, transfer processing. I didn't breathe, not yet. The system demanded secondary authorization for the next tranche. Text verification to Kendrick's phone, which was, according to Nathan, currently locked in a secure locker outside the boardroom. I rerouted it using the back door he'd found buried in the settings, a loophole built for traveling executives. The code arrived on my device instead. Second transfer. Third. Each confirmation felt like a heartbeat, loud and desperate. I checked the time, 8:37. 43 minutes until the earliest the meeting might break. I pictured Kendrick frowning at some slide, oblivious to the fact that the leverage he planned to use against me was evaporating in real time. A system alert flashed. Unusual activity detected. Please confirm intent. I confirm, I whispered to the empty room, clicking the box with more force than necessary. Finally, the dashboard refreshed. The joint account balance dipped, subtle enough not to trigger an immediate institutional alarm, significant enough to change everything. Winston Strategic Trust showed a new figure. $3,000 $3 million, sheltering behind legal walls Nathan and Cassandra had built overnight, barred from Kendrick by clauses he'd never imagined could be used against him. I logged out, cleared the history, and closed the laptop. The silence that followed was almost violent. Somewhere across the city, Kendrick was still talking about market volatility and shareholder value, confident in his control. He had no idea that while he lectured a room full of men about risk management, his wife had just executed the cleanest heist of his career. The restaurant Kendrick chose was the kind of place that prided itself on not having a sign. Just a discreet brass plaque, a waiting list that stretched for months, and lighting calibrated to make wealth look effortless. He held my hand as the hostess led us through the room, fingers warm, grip familiar. To anyone watching, we were the picture of a couple still in love. Him in a midnight suit, me in a dress he'd once said made me look like old money. He'd insisted on it tonight, pulling it from the closet himself, brushing invisible lint from the fabric with a tenderness that almost fooled me. "Thought we should celebrate," he said as we sat, the city glittering below the glass. "We've both been under pressure. You deserve a night where it's just us." Just us. And the divorce papers I knew were hiding somewhere within reach. The waiter appeared with champagne Kendrick had ordered ahead of time, the same vintage from our wedding reception. He lifted his glass, eyes soft, voice warm enough to scald. "To us, Tish. 5 years in, and we're just getting started." I clinked, my glass to his, the crystal singing a clear, bright note. $3 million rested in a trust he didn't know existed. His leverage had already evaporated, but he smiled like a man holding all the cards. Throughout dinner, he performed nostalgia like it was theater. He brought up the first time we'd met at that fundraiser, the way I'd rolled my eyes at his joke about hostile takeovers. He asked about my charity projects with an attentiveness that had been missing for months, laughed at my stories, touched my wrist when I spoke as if anchoring himself to me. Anyone else might have mistaken it for a turning point. But there were tells. The way his gaze flicked, almost imperceptibly, toward his jacket draped over the empty chair. The way he checked his watch between courses, calculating something behind his eyes. The faint stiffness in his shoulders, like a man bracing for impact he believed he controlled. Dessert arrived. A molten chocolate cake with a sparkler planted in the center. "A little early," he said, smiling, "but consider this an anniversary warm-up." The sparkler hissed and crackled between us, throwing sharp light across his features. For a heartbeat, the mask slipped. I saw the predator underneath, the man from those legal memos, the one who had labeled me subject and scheduled my ruin like a meeting. I smiled back anyway, lifted my fork, played my part. If he wanted this to be our last supper, I was willing to let him believe it. Just not in the way he planned. The waiter cleared our dessert plates with practiced silence, leaving behind 2 coffee cups and the kind of intimate quiet that money could buy. Kendrick reached for his jacket with the languid ease of a man who believed he'd already won. "Before we go," he said, voice still honeyed but edged with something sharper, "there's something we need to discuss." He withdrew a manila envelope from the inner pocket, the same corporate beige as the folder I'd found on his desk. For a moment, it simply rested between us on the white tablecloth, an object with gravity, pulling everything toward its center. "I think you know what this is," he said, sliding it across the table with 2 fingers, almost gentle. The smirk arrived slowly, curling at the edge of his mouth like he'd rehearsed it. "I wanted to do this somewhere civilized. You deserve that much." I didn't reach for the envelope. I already knew what it contained. The dissolution petition, the bad faith accusations, the timeline designed to leave me destitute while Elena moved into her glass palace. Instead, I lifted my wine glass, watching the light fracture through the burgundy. "You're filing," I said, not a question. "It's for the best." His tone was patronizing, the voice he used with junior associates and waitstaff. "You'll be taken care of within reason. My team has prepared a modest settlement offer, enough to start over somewhere quiet. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere out of sight." I took a slow sip, let the wine settle on my tongue, then set the glass down with deliberate care. The silence stretched just long enough for his smile to falter at the edges. "Kendrick," I said, voice steady as stone, "before you finish that speech, You should check your balance. His brow creased, confusion briefly disrupting the performance. What? The Pedersen-Winston investment vehicle. Check it. He laughed, a short bark of disbelief. Tish, this isn't the time for... Check it. Something in my tone made him pause. He reached for his phone, unlocked it with a swipe, fingers moving with muscle memory. I watched the screen light his face, watched him navigate to the portal, watched the exact moment comprehension arrived. The color drained from his features. What did you do? The words came out strangled, the smirk obliterated. I leaned back in my chair, fingers still resting lightly on the stem of my glass. I relocated $3 million into a trust you have no access to. Consider it my counteroffer. His jaw worked soundlessly. Around us, the restaurant hummed with oblivious conversation, crystal clinking, wealth performing its usual rituals. You can't, he started. I already did. 72 hours ago, while you were busy planning my destruction. I tilted my head. Let a small, cold smile touch my lips. Your lawyers were very thorough in their documentation. I appreciate that. Kendrick's hand tightened around his phone until his knuckles blanched. You stole from me. I reclaimed what I helped build. I stood, smoothing my dress, the one he'd chosen for me like a costume for his final act. The papers are all yours, Kendrick. File them. But you might want to call your mistress first. Tell Elena the condo purchase just got complicated. I left him sitting there, the envelope unopened. His empire suddenly $3 million lighter, the predator finally understanding what it felt like to be prey. Kendrick always believed crises happened to other people. He built an empire on that quiet arrogance, on the assumption that he'd always be the one holding the knife, never the one feeling its edge. The first crack came 3 days after the dinner. I heard it through Cassandra, who heard it through a partner at one of the firms Kendrick used when he wanted to send a message. His usual litigation team had requested their retainer, a number that would make most people faint. Standard procedure. Only this time, the transfer bounced back flagged, insufficient available liquidity. His assets weren't gone. That was the cruelest part. On paper, Kendrick was still worth a small country. But the cash pipeline he relied on, the slush he used to keep attorneys loyal and mistresses obedient, was jammed behind the walls of a trust he didn't control. He called me first. Tish, he said, skipping any pretense of warmth. We need to talk about what you did. Your lawyers can send any concerns to my counsel, I replied, letting his own corporate script wrap around him. You remember Cassandra. Silence. I could almost hear him recalculating, trying to find the version of me who would back down if he pressed hard enough. You're sabotaging yourself, he snapped. This will get ugly. It already was ugly, I said, and hung up. The next wave hit Elena. Word filtered back in pieces. The condo closing delayed, the developer suddenly uncertain without proof of cleared funds, the high-end boutique refusing to extend her private line of credit now that the Pedersen account was under review. Kendrick had promised her a seamless transition into billionaire life. Instead, she was fielding polite but firm calls from people who cared more about numbers than charm. He started showing up places he'd once sent people to. Bank offices, emergency meetings with wealth managers, late-night calls to anyone who owed him a favor. The problem was simple and humiliating. He had plenty of money, but none he could reach fast enough. His legal team, smelling volatility, adjusted their tone. Without a secured retainer, their emails softened, caveats multiplying, timelines stretching. Power, it turned out, had a payment schedule. Kendrick tried one last angle, cornering me outside the penthouse elevator, his composure frayed at the edges. "You're overplaying your hand," he said, eyes bloodshot, tie loosened like a noose he'd half untied. "You think 3 million gives you leverage? I can bury you in litigation for years." "You could," I agreed, "if you could afford to start." For the first time since I'd known him, he looked truly lost. Not angry, not strategizing. Just a man staring at the realization that someone had beaten him at his own game. The meltdown wasn't a single explosion. It was a slow, visible unraveling. Credit lines tightening, allies hesitating, whispers starting in rooms he no longer fully controlled. All because a depreciating asset refused to go quietly and took the liquidity with her. Elena left him the way people exit burning buildings, quickly, without looking back. I heard about it weeks after the fact, through the same discreet channels that had fed me whispers of Kendrick's unraveling. The story was simple, brutal. A hedge fund heir with cleaner books and deeper pockets had appeared in Elena's orbit, where Kendrick now offered delayed wire transfers and postponed condo closings. The new man provided immediate upgrades: a townhouse in London, a yacht berth in Capri, a black card with no questions asked. Elena didn't scream or dramatize. She simply stopped showing up. One day she was glued to Kendrick's side. The next, her desk was cleared, her access revoked, her name erased from the company directory like a typo. The condo deal collapsed quietly soon after, the developer moving on to a buyer whose money wasn't mysteriously trapped behind legal firewalls. Kendrick didn't call to tell me. Pride wouldn't allow that. But I saw the confirmation in the way his name started appearing in gossip columns, not as the golden boy of finance, but as an almost tragedy. A billionaire facing temporary liquidity challenges. A man restructuring his personal life and portfolio. By then, my own world was no longer defined by his shadow. The Winston Strategic Trust became more than a shield. It became seed capital. With Nathan's guidance and Cassandra's brutality at the negotiating table, the 3 million evolved into the foundation of something that belonged entirely to me. A luxury brand built around the world I knew intimately, but had never been allowed to own. It started small. A line of tailored pieces designed for women who moved through powerful rooms without a safety net. Fabrics that held their shape. Seams that never apologized. I signed the first vendor contracts under my name alone. No hyphen, no silent partner looming over the letterhead. The launch event was held in a gallery, not a ballroom. The guest list curated without a single obligation invite. The response was immediate. Editors called the collection ruthlessly elegant. Investors, my investors, talked about scaling, global reach, heritage positioning. For once, when cameras flashed, they were pointed at me, not at the man standing beside me. One evening, months later, I stood in my own showroom, watching a client study her reflection in a mirror, framed by brushed brass. She wore one of my jackets, the cut sharp, the line clean. She looked like a woman who refused to be treated as a depreciating asset. "Do you like it?" I asked. She smiled, a slow, certain curve. "It makes me feel expensive," she said, "but in my own right." I locked the doors myself that night, alarms set to a code no one else knew. The city pulsed outside, indifferent and endless. My life was smaller in some ways now, no jet, no penthouse view. But it was also finally mine, bought not with Kendrick's money, but with the part of it he had never planned on me keeping. Out of the ashes of his empire, I hadn't just survived. I'd branded my own name into the skyline. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time. Next.